What would you do if someone judged you by your clothes and threw you out like garbage? Grace walked into Tiffany and Company, her heart full of love for her daughter's special day. But Jessica, the sales assistant, had already made up her mind about who deserved to shop there. I'm looking for something special for my daughter's birthday. She's turning 8 and loves beautiful things. Jessica's eyes scanned Grace's modest outfit, her lips curling into a condescending smile. Ma'am, perhaps you'd be more comfortable shopping at more affordable stores down the street. Grace felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she wasn't going to give up that easily. I have money. I just want to buy my daughter something beautiful for a special day. Jessica actually laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the pristine store. Look, lady, our jewelry starts at $5,000. I don't think you understand what kind of store this is. Grace took a deep breath. She had dealt with judgment before, but this was particularly painful. I understand perfectly. I also understand that money doesn't determine a person's worth. Jessica rolled her eyes dramatically. Security, we have a situation here. The security guard approached Grace, his face apologetic but his duty clear. Grace held her head high as she walked toward the exit, her heart breaking for her daughter. Jessica smirked with satisfaction, completely unaware of the storm she had just unleashed. Little did Jessica know, she had just humiliated one of the wealthiest women in California. And when her husband finds out what happened, heads are going to roll. But will Grace's daughter ever get the special gift she deserves? The answer will shock you and restore your faith in justice. Before we continue this incredible story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing stories that will touch your heart. To understand why Grace chose simplicity over luxury, we need to go back 15 years ago when her life was completely different. Grace was working 2 demanding jobs just to support her sick mother, shopping at discount stores, and carefully clipping coupons to make ends meet each month. She had learned through years of struggle that true happiness didn't come from material possessions or expensive brands, but from the genuine love you shared with family and the selfless kindness you showed to others every single day. Her values were shaped by hardship and sacrifice, teaching her that a person's true worth had absolutely nothing to do with their bank account, designer clothes, or social status in the community. Robert had inherited his father's massive hotel empire worth hundreds of millions, but he was completely different from other wealthy men Grace had encountered throughout her difficult life. He volunteered at soup kitchens every weekend without fail, donated anonymously to numerous charities across the city, and treated everyone with genuine respect regardless of their social status, appearance, or financial situation. When he first saw Grace helping a homeless veteran outside a small coffee shop, giving him her own lunch without any hesitation, Robert immediately knew he had found someone truly special who shared his deepest values and moral compass about helping others. Their first date wasn't in an expensive 5-star restaurant with crystal chandeliers and celebrity chefs, but at a small family-owned cafe where Grace felt completely comfortable and could be her authentic self. Grace talked passionately about her big dreams of helping underprivileged children get better education opportunities and breaking the endless cycles of poverty that trapped so many families. Robert realized that Grace possessed something his money couldn't buy: a pure heart and genuine compassion for others that made her infinitely more beautiful and valuable than any superficial woman he had ever met in his entire privileged life, surrounded by fake people. When they finally married, after 2 years of dating, Grace made Robert solemnly promise that their incredible wealth would never change who they were as people or corrupt their fundamental values about treating others with dignity. She insisted on keeping their wedding ceremony simple and intimate with only close family, donating what they would have spent on an extravagant celebration to local children's charities instead. Grace wanted their future children to understand the true value of hard work, empathy, and humility rather than growing up spoiled, entitled, and completely disconnected from the real world around them where people struggled every day. When Sophie was born 8 years ago, Grace made the controversial decision to enroll her in the local public school instead of exclusive private academies that Robert's wealthy business associates always recommended for their own privileged children. Every single morning without exception, Grace would personally walk Sophie to school, teaching her to say hello to the crossing guard, thank the cafeteria workers for their service, and include children who seemed lonely or left out during recess and playground activities. These small but meaningful acts of kindness and consideration would shape Sophie's character and worldview for the rest of her life. Grace spent 3 full days every week volunteering at the local food bank and community center, often bringing Sophie along to help pack nutritious meals for families in need throughout their community. She wanted her daughter to understand that having abundance and incredible privilege meant absolutely nothing if you didn't use it to help others who were struggling through difficult financial times. Sophie learned firsthand that true wealth meant having the ability and responsibility to make a positive difference in people's lives when they needed it most, especially during holidays and emergencies. Grace often took Sophie to thrift stores and consignment shops around the city, teaching her that beautiful and unique things could be found anywhere and that an expensive price tag didn't determine an item's true value or worth to someone. They would spend hours browsing through racks, finding unique vintage pieces, and talking about the interesting stories behind each item they discovered together. Sophie learned to appreciate creativity, imagination, and individual style over expensive brand names that other wealthy children in their elite social circle constantly coveted and demanded from their parents. Robert supported every single decision Grace made about their unconventional lifestyle choices, even when his business partners and wealthy friends openly criticized him for not sending Sophie to elite private schools or living in the most prestigious gated neighborhood available. He knew that Grace's values and unique parenting approach were creating something infinitely more valuable than any fortune. A daughter who would grow up to be genuinely compassionate, grounded in reality, and truly caring about others less fortunate than herself. This meant more to him than any social status or peer approval. Every night before bed, Grace would read Sophie carefully chosen stories about heroes who helped others in need, princesses who chose kindness over crowns and material wealth, and exciting adventures where characters learned that true riches came from friendship and love rather than gold or precious jewels. Sophie grew up believing that being truly rich meant having people who genuinely cared about you and having the ability to make others smile when they were sad or struggling through the most difficult times in their lives, which was a lesson money couldn't teach. This was the remarkable woman who had been humiliated and thrown out of Tiffany and Company like a common criminal who didn't belong in such an exclusive establishment. Grace, who had spent years patiently teaching her daughter that every single person deserved respect and dignity regardless of their appearance or social status, had just experienced the exact opposite treatment from someone who judged her based purely on her clothes. But what Jessica didn't know was that Grace's husband wouldn't let this terrible injustice stand, and the consequences of her actions would teach everyone involved a lesson they would never forget. Grace arrived home feeling emotionally drained and defeated, her usual bright smile replaced by a heavy sadness that seemed to weigh down her shoulders. She tried to compose herself before seeing Sophie, not wanting her daughter to witness how cruel people could be over something as meaningless as clothing. The humiliation from the jewelry store kept replaying in her mind, making her question whether she had made the right choice in dressing so simply. But deep down, she knew that her worth as a person had nothing to do with designer labels or expensive accessories that impress shallow people. Sophie came bounding into the living room with her usual enthusiasm, her face lighting up with pure joy at seeing her mother return home. "Mommy, did you find something beautiful for my birthday? I've been thinking about it all day at school," she asked with innocent excitement, bouncing on her toes. Grace's heart ached as she looked at her daughter's hopeful expression, knowing she would have to disappoint the most important person in her world. She had promised Sophie something special, and now she felt like she had failed as a mother because of one person's cruel judgment. Grace knelt down to Sophie's eye level, gently brushing a strand of curly hair from her daughter's face while trying to find the right words. "Well, sweetheart, Mommy ran into a little problem today, but don't worry. We'll find you something even more special," she said softly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sophie, with the intuitive sensitivity that children often possess, immediately noticed that something was wrong with her usually cheerful mother. "Mommy, why do you look sad? Did someone hurt your feelings?" she asked with genuine concern, wrapping her small arms around Grace's neck. Just then, Robert walked through the front door, returning early from a business meeting downtown. He immediately sensed the heavy atmosphere in the room and noticed Grace's forced smile and Sophie's worried expression. Something was clearly wrong in his usually happy household, and his protective instincts kicked in immediately. "What's going on here?" "Grace, you look upset," he said, setting down his briefcase and loosening his tie as he approached his wife and daughter. His sharp business mind could read people's emotions like an open book, and he could tell that Grace was trying hard to hide something painful that had happened. Grace quickly stood up, attempting to brush off Robert's concern with a wave of her hand and a weak smile. "Oh, it's nothing really. Just a silly misunderstanding at one of the stores today. Nothing worth talking about," she said, clearly trying to minimize whatever had happened to her. But Robert knew his wife better than anyone, and he could see right through her attempt to downplay the situation. After 15 years together, he recognized all the signs when Grace was trying to protect others from her own pain. Her voice had that particular tone she used when something had really hurt her deeply. Robert gently took Grace's hands in his, looking directly into her eyes with the kind of loving intensity that had first made her fall in love with him years ago. "Grace, we've been married for 10 years. I know when something has really hurt you, and I can see it written all over your face right now. Please tell me what happened today," he said firmly but gently, his voice filled with both concern and determination. Sophie watched the exchange between her parents with wide, curious eyes, sensing that this was something important. Robert's protective nature wouldn't let him ignore his wife's obvious distress, no matter how much she tried to hide it. Grace sighed deeply, realizing that Robert wouldn't let this go until she told him the complete truth about what had happened at Tiffany & Company. "All right, if you must know, I went to that jewelry store on Rodeo Drive to look for something special for Sophie's birthday." She began hesitantly, glancing at their daughter who was pretending to play but obviously listening to every word. "The saleswoman took one look at my clothes and decided I didn't belong there. She was incredibly rude and suggested I shop somewhere more suitable for people like me." Grace continued, her voice growing quieter as she relived the humiliation of being judged so harshly. Robert's jaw tightened as he listened to Grace's account, his business-trained composure barely containing the fury that was building inside him like a volcano ready to erupt. "She actually asked you to leave because of how you were dressed?" he asked in a dangerously quiet voice, his hands slowly clenching into fists at his sides. Grace nodded, still looking down at the floor in embarrassment, feeling ashamed even though she had done nothing wrong. The injustice of the situation made Robert's blood boil, but he forced himself to remain calm for Sophie's sake. No one, absolutely no one, had the right to treat his beloved wife with such disrespect and cruelty. Grace saw the dangerous look in Robert's eyes and immediately placed a calming hand on his arm, recognizing the signs of her husband's rarely seen but formidable temper. "Robert, please don't do anything rash. I don't want you to make a big scene or cause trouble over this. It's not worth it," she pleaded softly, genuinely worried about what her protective husband might do in his current state of righteous anger. She knew that when Robert felt his family had been wronged, he could be absolutely ruthless in seeking justice. "I just want to forget about it and find Sophie's present somewhere else. There are plenty of other jewelry stores in the city," Grace continued, hoping to defuse the situation. Robert looked at his wife with a mixture of love and determination that Grace had seen many times during their marriage when he was about to make an important business decision. "Grace, this isn't about making a scene or causing trouble. This is about justice and teaching people that everyone deserves to be treated with basic human dignity and respect," he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority that had built a business empire. "What happened to you today was completely unacceptable, and I'm not going to let it slide. That woman needs to learn that you can't judge people by their appearance, and I'm going to make sure she gets that lesson." Grace realized there was no stopping him now. Robert's face turned red with fury as he processed what Grace had just told him about her humiliation at the jewelry store. His hands clenched into tight fists at his sides, and his jaw muscles twitched with barely controlled anger. "She actually threw you out of the store because of your clothes?" he asked in a dangerously quiet voice, his business composure cracking under the weight of his protective rage. Grace had rarely seen her husband this angry in their 10 years of marriage, and she could practically feel the waves of indignation radiating from him. The injustice of what had happened to his beloved wife was eating away at his usually calm and controlled demeanor. Robert began pacing back and forth across their living room, his mind already working on how to handle this unacceptable situation. "I know Richard Thompson, the owner of that particular Tiffany & Company location, personally. We've done business together several times over the years," he said, his voice taking on a cold, calculating tone that Grace recognized from his most serious business dealings. "This cannot and will not go unpunished, Grace. No one treats my wife like garbage and gets away with it. That saleswoman crossed a line today, and this is not going to pass in Bronco. She's going to learn that actions have serious consequences." Grace quickly reached out and placed a gentle hand on Robert's arm, genuine worry evident in her voice and expression. "Robert, please don't do anything drastic. I don't want you to make a big scene or cause unnecessary trouble over this," she pleaded softly, trying to calm her husband's rising anger. "I know you're upset, and I appreciate that you want to defend me, but maybe we should just let this go and shop somewhere else. There are plenty of other jewelry stores in the city where we can find something beautiful for Sophie's birthday. I don't want this situation to escalate into something that might affect our family or cause problems we don't need." Robert turned to face Grace directly, his eyes blazing with moral conviction that she had seen countless times during their marriage when he stood up for important principles. "Grace, this isn't about making a scene or seeking revenge against someone who wronged us," he said firmly, his voice carrying absolute moral authority. "This is about justice and teaching people that everyone deserves to be treated with basic human dignity and respect, regardless of how they're dressed or what they look like. If we don't stand up to this kind of discrimination and prejudice, then we're essentially giving people permission to continue treating others the same cruel way they treated you today." Robert continued with growing intensity, his love for Grace and his principles evident in every word he spoke. "Do you think I'm going to let someone humiliate the woman I love and just pretend it never happened? You spend your entire life teaching Sophie about kindness and treating everyone with respect regardless of their circumstances or appearance. How can I look our daughter in the eye and tell her those values matter if I don't defend them when they're violated right in front of us? This isn't about pride or ego, Grace. This is about doing what's right and showing that good people don't stay silent when they witness injustice happening to innocent people." Grace felt torn between her natural inclination to avoid confrontation and her growing realization that Robert might actually be right about the bigger picture at stake. "I understand what you're saying, and I know your heart is in the right place," she said slowly, her voice reflecting her internal struggle with the situation. "But I'm worried about what might happen if you get involved in this. These kinds of conflicts can escalate quickly and spin out of control in ways we can't predict. What if they retaliate somehow? What if this affects our family or your business relationships? I don't want Sophie to get caught up in any drama or negativity because of what happened to me today." Robert's expression softened slightly as he saw Grace's genuine concerns, but his determination remained unshaken by her worries. "Grace, I understand your fears, but this is about more than just us. That saleswoman hurt you today, but if we don't say something, she'll hurt other innocent people tomorrow who don't have someone like me to defend them," he explained patiently, his voice filled with moral conviction. "This is about teaching a lesson that might prevent other families from experiencing the same humiliation you went through today. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, and someone needs to make sure that woman learns that fundamental truth." Robert looked at Grace with the kind of unwavering determination that had built his business empire and earned him respect throughout the business community. This isn't about revenge, Grace. This is about justice and making sure that what happened to you today doesn't happen to anyone else, he said with quiet but absolute conviction. That saleswoman needs to understand that her behavior was completely unacceptable, and she needs to learn that lesson before she damages someone else's self-esteem or ruins another family special occasion. I'm not going to let this injustice stand because allowing it to pass without consequences would be wrong, and we both know it. Grace looked into Robert's determined eyes and slowly began to understand that this battle was about much more than just her personal experience at the jewelry store. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice growing stronger with conviction as she spoke. "If we don't say something, that woman will continue treating other people the same way she treated me today. Maybe the next person won't have someone like you to defend them. Maybe they'll just go home feeling worthless and ashamed, thinking they deserve to be treated that way." Grace realized that staying silent might actually enable the saleswoman's cruel behavior to continue affecting other innocent people who didn't deserve such treatment. Robert smiled with quiet satisfaction as he saw Grace's perspective finally align with his own sense of justice and moral responsibility. Exactly. This is about teaching a valuable lesson about human dignity and respect that might prevent other people from experiencing the same humiliation you went through today, he said with firm resolve, his voice filled with purpose and unwavering determination. That saleswoman needs to understand that her behavior was completely unacceptable, and she needs to learn that lesson properly. I know the owner personally, and this situation is not going to pass in Bronco. Justice will be served, Grace, and it's going to teach everyone involved that all people deserve to be treated with basic human dignity and respect. The next morning, Robert sat in his home office with a calculated smile playing across his lips as he prepared to make the phone call that would set his plan in motion. He had spent the entire night thinking about the best way to handle this situation, and he had come up with the perfect strategy to catch the jewelry store completely off guard. His fingers drummed against the mahogany desk as he mentally rehearsed exactly what he was going to say to Richard Thompson, knowing that the element of surprise would be crucial to the success of his mission. Robert understood that sometimes the most effective justice came wrapped in deception, and today he was going to use every trick in his considerable arsenal to ensure that the people who had humiliated his wife would face the consequences of their actions. Robert dialed Richard Thompson's direct business line and put on his most charming and persuasive voice, the one he used when closing million-dollar hotel deals with international investors. "Richard, good morning. This is Robert Henderson. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," he said with perfectly practiced enthusiasm, giving no indication of his true intentions. "I've been thinking about diversifying my investment portfolio lately, and I'm very interested in discussing some potential opportunities in the luxury retail sector, particularly with established brands like Tiffany & Company. Would it be possible for us to meet this afternoon at your Beverly Hills location? I'd love to see the operation firsthand and discuss some ideas I have for a substantial investment partnership that could benefit both of our businesses significantly." After securing the meeting under the guise of discussing a major investment opportunity, Robert made his way to his expansive walk-in closet to select the perfect outfit for what was about to unfold. He carefully chose his most expensive charcoal gray Armani suit, the one he typically reserved for the most important board meetings and high-stakes business negotiations. Every detail had to be absolutely perfect. The Italian silk tie that cost more than most people's weekly salary, solid gold cufflinks that had belonged to his late father, and handcrafted Italian leather shoes that gleamed like mirrors. This wasn't about vanity or showing off his wealth. This was about ensuring that when he walked into that jewelry store, every person there would immediately recognize his status and treat him with the respect they had denied his wife. Robert stood in front of his full-length mirror, making final adjustments to his appearance with the precision of a military officer preparing for battle. His reflection showed a man who commanded respect and wielded considerable power in the business world, someone who could make or break careers with a single phone call or recommendation. "Perfect," he murmured to himself, satisfied that his appearance would send exactly the right message to everyone at the jewelry store. He wanted them to see wealth, success, and influence when they looked at him, because the contrast between how they would treat him versus how they had treated Grace would serve as the foundation for the lesson he was about to teach them about judging people based on their appearance. Meanwhile, at the Tiffany and Company store, Jessica was having the time of her life entertaining her colleagues with what she considered to be yesterday's most amusing encounter. "Oh my God, you guys, you should have seen this pathetic woman who wandered in here yesterday, looking like she just crawled out of a discount bin at Walmart," she said with cruel laughter, gesturing dramatically as she painted her distorted version of events for her captivated audience. Her voice carried across the pristine showroom as she continued her heartless performance, completely oblivious to the fact that her actions were about to come back to haunt her in ways she could never have imagined. The other sales associates gathered around her, some laughing along while others looked uncomfortable with Jessica's obvious cruelty and unprofessional behavior. Jessica continued her performance with increasing enthusiasm, clearly enjoying being the center of attention as she mocked Grace's encounter from the previous day. She actually had the nerve to ask about jewelry for her daughter's birthday. Can you believe it? Like she could afford anything in this store with her pathetic little budget, Jessica said while mimicking what she imagined was Grace's voice, making exaggerated facial expressions that she thought were hilarious. "I had to practically escort her to the door before she embarrassed herself further by asking about actual prices. Some people really need to learn to know their place in society and shop at stores that are more appropriate for their obviously limited financial circumstances. I probably saved her from the humiliation of being rejected when her credit card inevitably got declined." Maria Santos, the more experienced sales associate, shifted uncomfortably behind the counter as she listened to Jessica's cruel retelling of yesterday's encounter, her years of customer service experience telling her that something about this story didn't sit right. "Jessica, don't you think you might be being a little too harsh? I've been working in retail for over 20 years, and I've learned that you really can't judge customers by their appearance," Maria said cautiously, trying to inject some wisdom and professionalism into the conversation without directly confronting her younger colleague. "I've seen millionaires come in here wearing casual clothes, and I've seen people with no money dressed in designer outfits they couldn't afford. You never really know someone's true financial situation just by looking at them, and treating customers badly can sometimes backfire in unexpected ways." Jessica waved off Maria's concerns with a dismissive laugh and an eye roll that demonstrated her complete lack of respect for her more experienced colleague's advice and wisdom. "Oh, please, Maria, you're being way too paranoid and overly cautious about this whole thing. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I can spot a fake customer from a mile away," she declared with supreme confidence in her obviously flawed judgment and discriminatory practices. "Trust me, that woman yesterday was definitely not our type of clientele, and she needed to learn that lesson before she wasted any more of her valuable time. I've been working in luxury retail long enough to know who belongs here and who doesn't, and my instincts are never wrong about these things. She'll probably never have the courage to come back here again after the reality check I gave her." Jessica's laughter grew even more cruel and heartless as she continued to relive what she considered to be her finest moment of putting someone in their place the previous day. "The best part was the look on her face when I suggested she try shopping at more affordable stores that would be better suited to her obviously limited budget," she said with malicious glee, clearly taking pleasure in the memory of Grace's humiliation and embarrassment. She looked so shocked and hurt, like she actually thought she belonged in a high-end establishment like this one. It was almost sad, really, but someone had to teach her about reality and social boundaries. "I'm actually doing people like her a favor by being honest about their financial limitations instead of letting them continue to live in fantasy land where they think they can afford luxury items." Jessica concluded her story with a self-satisfied smirk, completely convinced that she had handled yesterday's situation perfectly and professionally, despite the obvious cruelty and discrimination she had displayed toward an innocent customer. "Honestly, I don't understand why some people even bother trying to shop at places that are so clearly out of their league financially and socially," she said with a final laugh, straightening her perfectly styled hair with obvious pride in her appearance and perceived superiority. "At least now that woman knows where she actually belongs in the retail hierarchy, and she won't waste anyone else's time by pretending she can afford things that are meant for people with real money and class. I probably did her a favor by giving her a dose of reality that will save her from future embarrassment at other upscale establishments. Little did Jessica know that her victim's husband was about to walk through those doors, and her world was about to be turned completely upside down. That afternoon, Robert pushed open the heavy glass doors of Tiffany & Company and stepped into the pristine showroom with the kind of commanding presence that immediately drew the attention of every person in the establishment. His perfectly tailored Armani suit, confident stride, and obvious aura of wealth and success created an instant transformation in the atmosphere of the store, as if a switch had been flipped to activate the highest level of customer service protocols. The contrast between his reception and Grace's experience from just 24 hours earlier was so stark that it would have been comical if it weren't so deeply disturbing and indicative of the systemic prejudice that existed within the establishment. Every sales associate in the store immediately straightened their posture, adjusted their appearance, and began positioning themselves for the opportunity to serve what was obviously a very wealthy and important potential customer who could make their monthly sales quotas with a single purchase. Mr. Thompson, the store manager, practically sprinted across the marble showroom floor when he spotted Robert entering his establishment, his experienced eye immediately recognizing the signs of serious wealth and influence that demanded his personal attention and highest level of service. "Mr. Henderson, what an absolute pleasure to see you in our store today." He gushed with the kind of obsequious enthusiasm that was reserved exclusively for the most elite clientele, his voice carrying just the right mixture of respect and excitement about a potentially massive sale. "I've been looking forward to our meeting ever since your call this morning about the investment opportunity. Please, allow me to give you a personal tour of our finest pieces while we discuss business. I have some absolutely exquisite items that I think would perfectly demonstrate the kind of quality and craftsmanship that makes Tiffany & Company such a prestigious and profitable brand in the luxury market, exactly the kind of establishment that would benefit from your business expertise and financial backing." Jessica's eyes widened with dollar signs practically dancing in them when she saw the impeccably dressed businessman who had just become the center of attention in their store, and she immediately abandoned her conversation with the other sales associates to position herself for what she assumed would be the most lucrative sale opportunity of her entire career. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Tiffany & Company. I'm Jessica, and I would be absolutely delighted to help you find something special today," she said with a sickeningly sweet smile that was so dramatically different from the cold disdain and outright hostility she had shown Grace just one day earlier that it seemed like she had undergone a complete personality transplant overnight. Her entire demeanor transformed instantly from the arrogant, judgmental attitude she typically displayed toward customers she deemed unworthy, to the fawning, servile behavior she reserved for those she perceived as having serious money to spend on expensive jewelry and luxury items that would generate substantial commissions. Robert observed Jessica's dramatic transformation with the cold, analytical mind of a seasoned businessman who had spent years studying human behavior and motivation in corporate boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. He could see exactly how she sized up customers based purely on their appearance and adjusted her level of service accordingly, which was precisely the kind of discriminatory behavior that had led to Grace's humiliation the previous day. "Thank you, Jessica. I'm actually looking for something quite special today," he said with practiced charm, his voice carrying the kind of authority that commanded immediate attention, while his sharp eyes took note of every detail of her suddenly differential treatment. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. This was the same woman who had judged his wife so harshly based on her simple clothing, and now she was practically falling over herself to provide him with white-glove service, simply because he was wearing an expensive suit and exuded the confidence and bearing of serious wealth. Jessica practically glowed with excitement as she began showcasing the store's most expensive pieces, her hands moving gracefully over the sparkling diamond necklaces and platinum bracelets that filled the elegant display cases around them. "These are some of our most exquisite pieces, sir. This particular necklace features flawless diamonds totaling 15 carats, and it's priced at $85,000, she said with the kind of reverent tone typically reserved for discussing priceless works of art, clearly expecting Robert to be impressed by both the jewelry and the astronomical price tag. Her entire focus was on demonstrating the exclusivity and luxury of the items, assuming that someone of his obvious wealth and sophistication would appreciate only the finest and most expensive pieces in their collection. She was performing exactly the kind of attentive, personalized service that every customer deserved to receive, but which she had cruelly denied to Grace less than 24 hours earlier based solely on superficial judgments about appearance and perceived financial status. Robert played his role perfectly, examining the expensive jewelry with the kind of discerning eye that suggested he was accustomed to making significant purchases and investments in luxury items. "These are certainly beautiful pieces," he said thoughtfully, handling a particularly elaborate diamond bracelet with the casual confidence of someone for whom such expensive items were commonplace rather than once-in-a-lifetime purchases. "I'm curious, though, Jessica, do you provide the same level of personalized service and attention to all of your customers, regardless of how they might initially appear when they walk through those doors?" His question was posed casually, as if he were simply making polite conversation, but there was an undertone of genuine interest that suggested this wasn't just idle curiosity. Jessica, completely focused on closing what she assumed would be a massive sale, missed the subtle implication behind his words and the fact that he was beginning to probe into her customer service philosophy and practices. Jessica responded with the kind of practice confidence that came from years of working in luxury retail, though her answer revealed exactly the kind of prejudiced thinking that Robert was hoping to expose and address. "Well, of course we strive to provide excellent service to all our customers, but naturally we focus our attention on those clients who are most likely to make significant purchases," she said with a knowing smile, as if she were sharing insider knowledge about how the luxury retail business really worked behind the scenes. "You have to understand, sir, that in a store like this, we see all types of people who come in just to look around or waste our time, so we've learned to quickly identify serious buyers versus those who are just browsing without any real intention or ability to purchase. It's simply good business practice to prioritize our efforts where they're most likely to result in actual sales and satisfied customers who can afford our premium products and services." Robert's expression remained perfectly neutral, but Jessica would have been alarmed if she could have seen the cold fire that was beginning to burn in his eyes as she unknowingly confessed to exactly the kind of discriminatory practices that had hurt his wife. "I see. And how exactly do you make those determinations about who is a serious buyer and who is just browsing?" he asked with the kind of deceptive casualness that had lulled countless business opponents into revealing information they should have kept private. "Do you find that a person's appearance and clothing choices are generally reliable indicators of their financial capabilities and purchasing intentions? I'm curious about your methodology for assessing customer potential, since this seems to be such an important aspect of your customer service strategy." Jessica, still completely oblivious to the trap she was walking into, seemed almost eager to demonstrate her supposed expertise in reading customers and making snap judgments about their worth, not realizing that every word she spoke was providing Robert with more ammunition for the lesson he was about to teach her. Jessica leaned in slightly, as if sharing a professional secret with someone she considered to be a kindred spirit in the world of luxury retail and high-end customer service. "Honestly, you can usually tell within the first few seconds whether someone belongs in a store like this or not," she said with the kind of misguided confidence that comes from years of unchallenged prejudice and discrimination. "The way they dress, how they carry themselves, whether they seem comfortable in an upscale environment, it all tells a story about their background and financial situation. Just yesterday, for example, we had a woman come in wearing clothes that looked like she'd bought them at a discount store, asking about jewelry for her daughter's birthday. I could tell immediately that she was completely out of her element and probably couldn't afford anything here. So I suggested she might be more comfortable shopping somewhere more appropriate for her budget. It saved everyone time and prevented an embarrassing situation where she would have had to admit she couldn't actually make a purchase after wasting our time." Robert absorbed every word of Jessica's confession with the kind of controlled intensity that had served him well in countless business negotiations, where maintaining composure was crucial to achieving his objectives. "That's a very interesting approach to customer service," he said with deliberate neutrality, though anyone who knew him well would have recognized the dangerous undertone in his voice that appeared when he was preparing to destroy an opponent's position completely. "So you pride yourself on being able to judge people's financial worth and social status based on their appearance, and you adjust your level of service accordingly. You essentially decide who deserves respect and attention based on superficial characteristics like clothing and initial impressions." Jessica nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the fact that Robert was systematically documenting her discriminatory practices and building a case against her unprofessional behavior. She had just provided him with everything he needed to proceed to the next phase of his carefully orchestrated plan to teach her a lesson about judging people by their appearance. And she had done so with enthusiasm and pride in her prejudiced methodology. Robert took a deep breath and prepared to deliver the revelation that would change everything in that pristine jewelry store, his voice taking on the kind of authoritative tone that had commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals throughout his successful business career. "Jessica, I think it's time I told you exactly why I'm really here today," he said with deliberate calm, watching as her confident expression began to shift into something resembling concern and confusion. "You see, that woman you treated so poorly yesterday, the one you dismissed as being unworthy of shopping in your store based solely on her appearance, the one you suggested should find somewhere more appropriate for her budget. That woman was my wife. My wife, Grace Henderson." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and Robert could see the exact moment when the color began to drain from Jessica's face as the implications of what he had just revealed started to sink into her consciousness like a crushing weight. Jessica's face went completely white as if all the blood had suddenly drained from her entire body, and her mouth fell open in a perfect expression of shock and absolute horror that revealed the magnitude of her mistake. The expensive jewelry she had been so confidently displaying suddenly seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds in her trembling hands, and she had to grip the edge of the display case to keep herself steady as the full scope of what she had done became crystal clear. Her legs felt weak beneath her as she realized that she had humiliated and insulted the wife of one of the most powerful businessmen in California, someone who could destroy her career and reputation with a single phone call. The confident, arrogant saleswoman who had been so cruel to Grace just 24 hours earlier had completely disappeared, replaced by a terrified young woman who suddenly understood that her actions had consequences she had never imagined possible. Thompson's face turned an alarming shade of red as he realized that one of his employees had just created what could potentially be the biggest crisis in the store's history, and he immediately stepped forward with the kind of panic that comes from seeing your entire career flash before your eyes. "Mr. Henderson, please, I had absolutely no idea that this incident had occurred, and I want you to know that this kind of behavior is completely unacceptable and does not represent the values and standards of our establishment," he said rapidly, his voice carrying the desperate tone of a man who could see his professional life crumbling in real time. Sweat had begun to form on his forehead as he realized that Robert Henderson had the power and influence to destroy not just Jessica's career, but potentially the entire store's reputation in the luxury retail community. The panic in his eyes was unmistakable as he struggled to find words that could somehow contain the damage that had been unleashed in his pristine showroom. Robert maintained his composure with the iron discipline that had served him well in countless high-pressure business situations. But everyone in the store could sense the controlled fury that was simmering just beneath the surface of his professional demeanor like a volcano ready to erupt. "Let me tell you exactly what happened to my wife in this store yesterday," he said with quiet intensity, his words carrying the weight of absolute moral authority that made everyone present hang on his every syllable. "Grace walked into this establishment with nothing but love in her heart, wanting to buy something beautiful for our daughter's 8th birthday. She was treated with contempt, dismissed as unworthy, and essentially thrown out of your store like garbage, simply because she chose to dress modestly and humbly. She was humiliated and made to feel ashamed for no reason other than the superficial judgment of your employee here. His voice remained calm, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as he continued to recount the injustice that had been perpetrated against his beloved wife. Robert began to pace slowly in front of the jewelry displays, his movement deliberate and controlled as he continued to explain the gravity of what had occurred in their store the previous day. My wife, who spends her days volunteering at food banks and helping underprivileged children, who has dedicated her life to treating every person she meets with kindness and respect regardless of their circumstances, was treated as if she were somehow less deserving of basic human dignity simply because she didn't meet someone's shallow standards of what a wealthy customer should look like, he continued, his voice growing more intense with each word. The other sales associates had gathered at a respectful distance, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination, realizing that they were witnessing what would likely become legendary in the Beverly Hills retail community. Jessica stood frozen in place, her entire body trembling as she absorbed the full weight of Robert's words and understood that her cruel behavior had targeted someone who was everything she was not: kind, compassionate, and genuinely good. Robert stopped his pacing and turned to face Thompson directly, fixing him with the kind of intense stare that had intimidated countless business opponents and competitors throughout his career in high-stakes corporate negotiations. Mr. Thompson, I need you to answer a very important question for me, and I want you to think carefully before you respond, he said with the kind of deadly calm that was far more menacing than shouting would have been. Is this the official policy of your establishment? Do you train your employees to judge customers based on their appearance and treat them differently based on perceived social status and financial capability? Is discrimination and prejudice part of your customer service philosophy, or was yesterday's incident an aberration that goes against everything your store claims to represent? The question hung in the air like a sword ready to fall, and Thompson could feel the eyes of every person in the store focused on him as he struggled to formulate a response that could somehow salvage the situation without admitting to systematic discrimination that could result in legal consequences. Thompson's voice came out as a barely controlled stammer as he desperately tried to find words that could somehow repair the irreparable damage that had been done to his store's reputation and his own career prospects. Mr. Henderson, I swear to you that this behavior does not represent our values or our training. We would never instruct our employees to treat customers differently based on their appearance. This was a terrible mistake, a complete failure of judgment that goes against everything we stand for as a business, he said frantically, his hands shaking as he spoke. Behind him, Jessica had begun to cry silently, tears streaming down her face as she realized that her moment of cruel superiority had potentially destroyed not just her own career, but possibly the livelihoods of her colleagues as well. The tension in the store had become almost unbearable, with everyone present understanding that they were witnessing a moment that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved in the situation. Robert's expression shifted to one of cold skepticism as he continued to apply pressure to the situation, knowing that this was the moment when the truth about the store's actual practices would be revealed. And yet, Mr. Thompson, Jessica seemed quite confident in her approach yesterday. She didn't appear to be acting against her training or making a mistake. She seemed to believe that her behavior was appropriate and justified, he said with the kind of prosecutorial intensity that left no room for evasion or deflection. In fact, based on what I observed today, I would say that your employees are very well trained in the art of discrimination. They simply apply it selectively based on their assumptions about a customer's worth and ability to generate profits for your business. The question now is whether you're going to acknowledge this systematic problem and address it properly, or whether you're going to continue to pretend that this was an isolated incident that doesn't reflect your actual business practices and company culture. Robert surveyed the scene before him with the kind of cold satisfaction that came from seeing justice begin to unfold after a terrible wrong had been committed against someone he loved. Jessica was completely broken down, sobbing uncontrollably as she finally understood the magnitude of her cruelty and the consequences it would have for everyone around her. Thompson was sweating profusely, his face alternating between red and pale as he struggled to comprehend how to salvage anything from this disaster that had erupted in his pristine store. The other employees stood frozen in place, afraid to move or speak, understanding that they were witnessing the kind of reckoning that will be talked about in the luxury retail community for years to come. The atmosphere in the store had become electric with tension, as if everyone present was holding their breath, waiting for Robert to deliver whatever judgment he deemed appropriate for the injustice that had been perpetrated against his wife and family. Robert allowed the silence to stretch for what felt like an eternity, letting the full weight of the situation sink into the consciousness of everyone present before he spoke again with the kind of final authority that brooked no argument or negotiation. "Everyone in this store needs to understand something very clearly," he said with quiet intensity that somehow carried more power than shouting would have. "What happened to my wife yesterday was not just poor customer service. It was a fundamental violation of human dignity and respect that reveals something deeply troubling about the values and character of the people who work here. The fact that Jessica felt comfortable treating another human being with such cruelty and dismissiveness tells me that this kind of behavior has been tolerated, if not encouraged, in this establishment. The question now is whether you're all going to learn from this experience and become better people, or whether this moment of reckoning will pass without creating any real change in how you treat the human beings who walk through those doors seeking nothing more than basic courtesy and respect." The silence that followed was deafening, and everyone in the store understood that they had reached a pivotal moment that would determine the future of their workplace and their own professional lives. Thompson's desperation reached a fever pitch as he realized that his entire career and the store's reputation hung in the balance, and he began making increasingly frantic offers to try to salvage the situation that was spiraling completely out of his control. "Mr. Henderson, please, I'm begging you to give us a chance to make this right. Take anything you want from our store, completely free of charge. That 15-carat diamond necklace, the platinum bracelet collection, anything at all," he said rapidly, his hands shaking as he gestured toward the most expensive pieces in their inventory. "We'll cover the full cost as our way of apologizing for this terrible incident. Please, we'll do absolutely anything to demonstrate how sorry we are and how committed we are to making amends for Jessica's unacceptable behavior toward your wife yesterday." Robert shook his head firmly, his expression making it clear that Thompson had completely misunderstood what this situation was really about and what kind of resolution would actually address the underlying problem. "Mr. Thompson, you're missing the point entirely. I don't want anything from your store for free, and I don't want compensation or gifts," he said with quiet authority, his voice carrying the kind of moral conviction that couldn't be bought with jewelry or expensive gestures. "What happened to my wife yesterday wasn't about money or merchandise. It was about basic human dignity and respect. You can't fix discrimination and prejudice with free jewelry. What I want is for people to understand that every customer who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with courtesy and respect, regardless of how they're dressed or what you think they can afford. That's not something you can purchase. That's something you have to earn through changed behavior and genuine understanding." Jessica finally found her voice again and began desperately trying to justify her actions from the previous day, though her excuses only seemed to make the situation worse by revealing the depth of her prejudiced thinking. "Mr. Henderson, please understand, I was just trying to save your wife from embarrassment. I thought I was being helpful by directing her to stores that would be more suitable for her budget," she said with the kind of misguided sincerity that showed she still didn't grasp the fundamental wrongness of her behavior. "I see so many people come in here who clearly can't afford our prices, and they end up feeling bad when they have to leave empty-handed. I thought I was doing her a favor by being honest about what kind of store this is and who our typical customers are. I never meant to hurt her feelings. I was just being practical about the reality of retail business and customer expectations." Robert fixed Jessica with the kind of cold stare that had intimidated countless business opponents throughout his career, his expression making it clear that her attempts at justification were only making her situation worse. "Jessica, do you hear yourself right now? You're still defending your decision to judge and dismiss my wife based on her appearance," he said with controlled fury that was far more intimidating than shouting would have been. You're still trying to justify discrimination by calling it being practical or being helpful. You humiliated a paying customer because you decided, based on nothing but her clothes, that she didn't belong in your store. Those aren't explanations, they're confessions. You're admitting that you believe some people deserve respect and others don't, based solely on your superficial judgments about their worth and status. That kind of thinking is exactly the problem we need to address here. Robert paused for a moment, his expression shifting from anger to something that resembled thoughtful consideration as he prepared to present his proposal for addressing this situation in a way that might actually create positive change. Jessica, I'm going to offer you something you don't deserve, but that might teach you something valuable about human dignity and the importance of treating all people with respect, he said with measured deliberation, his voice carrying both authority and unexpected mercy. Instead of simply having you fired and ending your career in retail, I'm going to give you an opportunity to learn and grow from this experience. I run a foundation that helps families in need, and I want you to spend 1 week working with these families, getting to know them as individuals and understanding that a person's worth has nothing to do with their material possessions or social status. Jessica looked up at Robert with complete surprise and confusion, clearly not having expected this kind of response to her discriminatory behavior from the previous day. You want me to work at your foundation? I don't understand. Why would you want to help me learn anything after what I did to your wife? She asked hesitantly, her voice still shaking with uncertainty about what this unexpected offer might mean for her future. I was horrible to her. I judge her unfairly. I treated her like she didn't matter. Why wouldn't you just have me fired like Mr. Thompson offered? That's what most people would do in your situation, and it's probably what I deserve after the way I behaved yesterday. Robert's expression softened slightly as he began to explain his philosophy about education versus punishment, though his voice maintained its authoritative tone throughout the explanation. Because Jessica, revenge doesn't teach anyone anything valuable, and simply punishing you won't prevent you from making the same mistakes again in the future, he said with the kind of wisdom that comes from years of leadership experience. What you need is not termination, but transformation. You need to spend time with people who have little money but big hearts, people who will show you more kindness and respect than you show my wife yesterday, despite having far less material wealth than you do. If you can learn humility from families who treat others with dignity despite their own struggles, you might actually become a better person and a better employee. Jessica began to understand the profound nature of what Robert was offering her, and her expression shifted from confusion and fear to something that resembled genuine gratitude for this unexpected opportunity for personal growth. I'll do it, Mr. Henderson. I'll work at your foundation for a week, and I'll try to learn from the families there about treating people with respect regardless of their circumstances, she said with growing conviction, her voice stronger and more sincere than it had been throughout this entire ordeal. I don't know if I'll be any good at it, but I want to understand why what I did was so wrong, and I want to become someone who treats all people with the dignity they deserve. Thank you for giving me this chance to learn and grow instead of just destroying my career. Thompson visibly sagged with relief as he realized that the immediate crisis had passed and that there might be a path forward. Robert addressed the entire staff of the jewelry store, knowing that the lesson being taught today needed to extend far beyond just Jessica's education and personal transformation. Let this be a lesson for everyone who works in customer service, he said with the kind of moral authority that commanded attention and respect from every person present. The way you treat people says everything about your character and nothing about theirs. Every person who walks through those doors deserves courtesy and respect, regardless of their appearance or your assumptions about their financial situation. Jessica is going to learn about humility and compassion from people who have less money but more character than most of the wealthy customers you fawn over every day. As Robert prepared to leave the store, he delivered his final message with the kind of quiet intensity that would stay with everyone present for years to come. Jessica, you'll start at the foundation on Monday morning. Use this week to learn about what really matters in life. Not the price of jewelry or the status of customers, but the content of people's character and the way we treat each other, he said with firm resolve. This isn't about saving your job. This is about saving your humanity. The families you'll work with will teach you lessons about dignity, respect, and kindness that no amount of money can buy. Whether you learn from them or not is entirely up to you, but I suggest you pay attention. You might discover that the people you've been looking down on are actually the ones who could teach you the most about being a decent human being. The following Monday morning, Jessica arrived at the Henderson Family Foundation with a mixture of nervousness and curiosity, having spent the entire weekend thinking about what she might encounter during her week of mandatory service. She had traded her expensive designer work clothes for simple jeans and a modest t-shirt, feeling strangely out of place without her usual armor of luxury brands and perfectly styled appearance. The community center was located in a part of the city she had never visited before, surrounded by modest homes and small businesses that served working-class families rather than the wealthy clientele she was accustomed to encountering in Beverly Hills. As she approached the entrance, Jessica could hear the sounds of children playing and adults talking, creating an atmosphere of warmth and community that was completely different from the pristine silence of the jewelry store where she normally worked. Maria Santos, who had volunteered to help orient Jessica during her first day at the foundation, greeted her with the kind of genuine warmth that Jessica had rarely experienced in her professional life. "Good morning, Jessica. I'm so glad you decided to take Mr. Henderson up on his offer to volunteer here this week," Maria said with sincere enthusiasm, her voice carrying none of the judgment or condescension that Jessica might have expected given their previous interactions. "The families we serve here are some of the most wonderful people you'll ever meet, and I think you're going to learn a lot from them about what really matters in life. They may not have much money, but they have hearts full of kindness and generosity that puts most wealthy people to shame. Are you ready to roll up your sleeves and start helping people who could really use your assistance and support?" Jessica's first assignment was helping to serve breakfast to families who relied on the Foundation's meal program to ensure their children had nutritious food to start each day. As she ladled oatmeal and fresh fruit into bowls, she was struck by the genuine gratitude expressed by parents and children who thanked her enthusiastically for something as simple as a warm meal. "Thank you so much, miss," said a young mother holding a toddler while trying to manage breakfast for 3 other children. "This program is such a blessing for our family. Without it, my kids would be going to school hungry, and I can't bear the thought of that." Jessica found herself genuinely moved by the woman's sincere appreciation for help that Jessica had previously taken completely for granted, realizing that she had never truly understood what it meant to struggle for basic necessities like food and shelter. During her lunch break, Jessica sat with Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who had been coming to the foundation for help with groceries and medical expenses since her husband passed away the previous year. "You know, dear, I used to work in retail too. Many years ago when my children were small," Mrs. Rodriguez said with a warm smile that reached her eyes. "I learned that you can tell everything about a person's character by how they treat people who can't do anything for them in return. The kindest customers were often the ones who looked like they had the least, while some of the wealthiest people could be incredibly cruel and demanding." Jessica felt a stab of recognition as she realized that Mrs. Rodriguez was describing exactly the kind of person she had been just a few days earlier, someone who judged others based on appearance and treated them accordingly. In the afternoon, Jessica was assigned to help children with their homework in the Foundation's after-school program, where she met kids who were struggling academically not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked resources and support at home. "Miss Jessica, can you help me with this math problem?" asked 8-year-old Miguel, whose worn backpack and carefully patched clothes spoke to his family's financial struggles. As Jessica worked with him, she was amazed by his determination and positive attitude despite the challenges he faced every day. "My mama says education is the most important thing, even more important than having nice clothes or toys," Miguel explained with the kind of wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. "She says if I work hard in school, I can help other people someday, just like the people here help us." Jessica realized that this child possessed more maturity and perspective than she had demonstrated in years of working with wealthy adults. On Wednesday, Jessica was surprised to discover Grace working in the Foundation's kitchen, quietly preparing meals for families without any fanfare or recognition for her volunteer efforts. Grace looked up from the vegetables she was chopping and smiled warmly at Jessica, showing no trace of anger or resentment about their previous encounter at the jewelry store. "Hello, Jessica. I'm glad you decided to spend some time here this week," Grace said with genuine kindness, her voice carrying the same gentle tone she might use with any new volunteer. "These families have taught me so much about resilience and gratitude over the years. They've shown me that happiness doesn't come from material possessions, but from the connections we make with other people and the difference we can make in their lives. I think you're going to find this experience very eye-opening if you're willing to really listen to their stories and learn from their example." Jessica felt tears welling up in her eyes as she fully comprehended the magnitude of Grace's character and the depth of her own previous cruelty toward this remarkable woman. "Mrs. Henderson, I am so incredibly sorry for how I treated you at the store. I was awful to you. I judged you unfairly, and I have no excuse for my behavior," she said with genuine remorse, her voice breaking with emotion as she struggled to find adequate word for her apology. "Seeing you here, working with these families, treating everyone with such kindness and respect, it makes me realize how wrong I was about everything. You're one of the most generous and caring people I've ever met, and I treated you terribly because I was too shallow and prejudiced to see who you really are. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm truly ashamed of my actions, and I'm committed to becoming a better person because of what I've learned here this week." Grace placed a gentle hand on Jessica's shoulder with the kind of compassion that demonstrated the very qualities Jessica had failed to recognize during their first encounter at the jewelry store. "Jessica, I forgive you completely, and I'm proud of you for being willing to learn and grow from this experience," Grace said with sincere warmth, her voice carrying the kind of genuine forgiveness that can only come from someone with true strength of character. "What happened at the store doesn't define who you are as a person. How you choose to respond and what you learn from it is what matters now. The families here have taught me that everyone deserves a second chance, and everyone has the capacity to change and become better. You're already showing that you're willing to do the hard work of examining your own behavior and making changes, and that takes real courage and humility that not everyone possesses." By Thursday, Jessica had begun to understand the true scope of the Foundation's work as she helped the Martinez family navigate the paperwork required to access temporary housing assistance after they had lost their apartment due to unexpected medical bills. "We're not looking for handouts," Mr. Martinez explained with dignity despite his family's desperate circumstances. "We just need a little help to get back on our feet so we can take care of our children properly. My wife and I both work, but sometimes life throws you problems that are bigger than your paycheck, and you need community support to survive." Jessica realized that this man possessed more pride, integrity, and work ethic than many of the wealthy customers she had served at the jewelry store, yet she would have judged him harshly based on his appearance and circumstances if she had encountered him just 1 week earlier. As Jessica's week at the Foundation came to an end on Friday evening, she stood outside the community center watching families say goodbye to volunteers and each other, feeling fundamentally changed by everything she had experienced and learned. The woman who had walked into the jewelry store with such arrogance and prejudice just over a week ago no longer existed, replaced by someone who finally understood that a person's worth had nothing to do with their clothes, their bank account, or their social status. She had learned from families who treated her with kindness despite having every reason to distrust someone from her privileged background. And she had discovered that the most valuable lessons about humanity came from people who had been overlooked and dismissed by society. Jessica knew that she would return to her job at the jewelry store as a completely different person, one who would never again make the mistake of judging customers based on their appearance, because she had finally learned to see the dignity and worth that existed in every human being regardless of their circumstances. The following Monday morning, Jessica returned to Tiffany & Company as a completely transformed person, her outward appearance largely unchanged, but her inner character fundamentally different from the arrogant, judgmental woman who had worked there just 1 week earlier. Her colleagues immediately noticed something different about her demeanor. The condescending smirks and dismissive attitude towards certain customers had been replaced by genuine warmth and respect for every person who entered the store. "Good morning, everyone," Jessica said to her fellow sales associates, her voice carrying a humility and sincerity that hadn't been present in her previous interactions with coworkers. "I want to thank you all for covering for me this past week, and I hope I can be a better colleague and a better person going forward. I learned some very important lessons about treating people with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or circumstances, and I'm committed to applying those lessons every single day." Later that afternoon, Grace walked into the jewelry store with Sophie, finally ready to find the special birthday present that had been interrupted by discrimination and prejudice over a week earlier. Jessica immediately recognized Grace and felt her heart racing as she approached the woman she had treated so poorly during their previous encounter. "Mrs. Henderson, welcome back to our store," Jessica said with genuine warmth and respect, her voice carrying none of the condescension and judgment that had characterized their first meeting. "I know I have no right to expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm deeply sorry for how I treated you before, and I would be honored to help you find something beautiful for your daughter today, if you'll allow me that privilege. You taught me more about character and kindness in 1 week than I had learned in years, and I am truly grateful for that lesson." Grace smiled with the kind of gracious forgiveness that demonstrated the very character traits Jessica had failed to recognize during their first encounter, her demeanor showing no trace of resentment or anger about the previous humiliation. "Thank you, Jessica. I can see that you've learned something valuable during your time at the foundation, and I'm happy to give you the opportunity to help us find something special for Sophie's birthday," Grace said with genuine kindness, her voice carrying the same gentle tone she used with everyone she encountered. "The families you worked with this week are some of my dearest friends, and they have a wonderful way of teaching people about what really matters in life. I'm glad they were able to share their wisdom and love with you, because those lessons are more valuable than any jewelry we could purchase here today." Sophie looked up at Jessica with curious eyes, sensing the importance of this moment, but not fully understanding the significance of the interaction between the two adults. Jessica began showing Grace and Sophie various pieces of jewelry with the kind of genuine care and attention that every customer deserved, regardless of their appearance or perceived financial status. "Sophie, your mother told me you love beautiful things, and I think you have excellent taste," Jessica said warmly to the 8-year-old girl, her voice carrying none of the artificial sweetness she had once reserved only for wealthy customers. "This necklace has a heart pendant that sparkles in the light, and this bracelet has little charms that represent different virtues like kindness, courage, and compassion. What do you think catches your eye?" As Sophie examined the jewelry with wonder and excitement, Jessica realized that this moment of pure joy and family love was more valuable than any expensive sale she had ever made to wealthy customers who purchased jewelry out of status rather than genuine appreciation for beauty and meaning. Sophie's eyes lit up when she saw a delicate heart-shaped necklace that seemed to capture her imagination and speak to her young spirit. "Mommy, this one is perfect. It looks like the kind of heart that holds all the love for our family," she said with the kind of innocent wisdom that children often possess about important matters. Jessica carefully removed the necklace from the display case and helped Sophie try it on, watching as the little girl's face glowed with happiness and excitement about her special birthday gift. "You know what, Sophie? I think this necklace was waiting just for you," Jessica said with genuine warmth, realizing that helping a child find the perfect gift was infinitely more rewarding than any commission she could earn from expensive sales to adults who already had everything they could possibly want or need. As Grace completed the purchase of Sophie's birthday necklace, Jessica processed the transaction with the kind of professional respect and courtesy that should have been extended during their first encounter over a week earlier. "Mrs. Henderson, it has been an absolute honor to serve your family today, and I hope Sophie treasures this necklace for years to come," Jessica said sincerely, her words carrying genuine meaning rather than the empty pleasantries she had once offered to customers she deemed worthy of her attention. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make amends for my previous behavior, and thank you for teaching me through your example, and through the foundation that a person's character is what truly matters, not their clothing or social status. I promise you that I will never again make the mistake of judging someone based on their appearance, because I now understand that dignity and worth exist in every human being regardless of their circumstances. Grace looked at Jessica with the kind of gentle expression that conveyed both forgiveness and genuine pride in the young woman's transformation and growth. Jessica, I can see that you've learned something very important about treating people with kindness and respect, and I'm proud of you for being willing to examine your own behavior and make changes, Grace said with sincere encouragement, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had always understood the importance of giving people second chances. The most beautiful thing about human beings is our capacity to learn, grow, and become better versions of ourselves when we're willing to listen and change. You've shown real courage in acknowledging your mistakes and working to become a better person, and that's something to be proud of. I hope you'll continue to treat every customer who walks through these doors with the same respect and kindness you've shown us today. Jessica felt tears of gratitude welling up in her eyes as she realized the profound gift that Grace had given her through forgiveness and the opportunity for redemption and personal growth. Mrs. Henderson, I want you to know that I will never forget the lesson you and your family taught me about character, kindness, and the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect, she said with heartfelt sincerity, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who had experienced genuine transformation. You could have destroyed my career and my reputation, but instead you gave me the chance to learn and grow and become a better person. I promise you that I will spend the rest of my life trying to live up to the example you've set, and I will never again make the mistake of judging people based on superficial characteristics instead of the content of their character. Thank you for showing me what true class and grace really look like. That evening, the Henderson family celebrated Sophie's 8th birthday in their modest but love-filled home, surrounded by the kind of warmth and genuine happiness that money could never purchase. Sophie wore her new heart necklace with pride as she blew out the candles on her birthday cake, surrounded by parents who had taught her through their own example that the most important things in life were love, kindness, and treating others with respect regardless of their circumstances. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Grace said softly, watching her daughter's face glow in the candlelight with pure joy and innocence. Robert wrapped his arms around his wife and daughter, feeling grateful not just for their comfortable life, but for the opportunity to have taught someone an important lesson about human dignity and the power of forgiveness to transform lives and create positive change in the world. In the weeks and months that followed, Jessica became known throughout the Beverly Hills retail community as one of the most respectful and professional sales associates in luxury retail, treating every customer with genuine kindness regardless of their appearance, age, or perceived financial status. She continued volunteering at the Henderson Family Foundation on weekends, maintaining the relationships she had built with families who had taught her about character, resilience, and the importance of judging people by their hearts rather than their bank accounts. The lessons she had learned from Grace Henderson's forgiveness and Robert's wisdom about education over punishment had transformed not just her career, but her entire approach to life and relationships with other people. And whenever she encountered someone who reminded her of her former self, judgmental, superficial, and quick to dismiss others, she would gently share the story of how she learned that true wealth comes not from what you have, but from how you treat the people around you, especially those who can do nothing for you in return. Remember, you never know who you're talking to, so treat everyone with the same respect and kindness you would want to receive, because you never know when that person might be the one who teaches you the most important lesson of your life about what it really means to be human. Before I say goodbye, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what you thought of Grace's incredible journey. If this story touched your heart and taught you something about kindness and forgiveness, please hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us all about the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect. Thanks for joining me for this amazing tale, and I'll see you in the next story.